This is the last section discussing streams and how they affect the landscape. And this is looking at a couple of things, but mostly it's looking at the biggest changes created on the landscape. And the first is, remember, rivers are trying to cut things down to a fairly smooth surface. And there are a couple of theories people developed on how that occurs. Over time, people argued about these two theories, but we now believe that in different environments and in different settings, um, each of these ways work. There's the Davis's geomorphic cycle, and then Penck's theory. And here's basically what it looks like. Davis thought that the landscape, let's say you have a mountain building event and you build up a big, huge mountain. Davis thought that the mountain building event would gradually erode down and become smoother and flatter and smoother and flatter until it formed what was called a peneplain, a fairly flat surface that was basically one big, huge floodplain around that rivers were flowing around. Penck had an idea that the landscape, that rivers would basically do headward erosion and cut, and that the landscape would retreat, and it would get lower, but not as fast as the side of the mountain retreated. And so over time, you might end up with the same thing, but they occurred in very different ways. Both of these are based on the concept of landscape change, that the landscape starts off real flat, and then you have some sort of mountain building event or tectonic event, and the land rises up. And when the land rises up, the stream starts cutting down. And when a stream has made a nice flat valley and then starts cutting deeper again, it's called stream rejuvenation. And stream rejuvenation often leaves patches of the older valley floor along the sides of the stream. Here is an example from El Paso. This is a Google Earth image, and we're looking from about Fort Hancock north toward El Paso. There are the Franklins, there's the Sierra de Juarez, and here's the Rio Grande Valley. Nice flat valley floor. The river has been channelized to make a nice straight border, and so you don't see it, but it used to be a nice meandering stream through here. That valley floor is, you can tell it's cut laterally into the sides of the valley because you have the sudden break where you go from flat valley to steep, and this is true all over the El Paso area. And so if you go down toward anywhere from the freeway, you'll see you have fairly steep slopes that suddenly get very flat. If you look at the landscape here, overall there's this very flat surface, and this is actually a surface created by the Rio Grande. And that surface continues out to here. Then you can see a terrace right here and a terrace right here that marks stages in the down cutting of the valley. And over time, the Rio Grande has cut down about 100 meters, 300 feet, because the land around it has been going up as part of the Rio Grande Rift, and so the river has been cutting down. All of this cutting has happened in about the last 500,000 years after the river integrated down to the Gulf of Mexico. And there are, if you look in detail, you can find 4 terraces. One, we can see a couple here, but there are actually others that you can trace. And this is why, if you look around the west side of El Paso, you can see all those big mesas that stick out and then have steep slides. Those are all old terraces of the Rio Grande. And they show that the Rio Grande has undergone stream rejuvenation because the land around El Paso has been lifted up. You can also get entrenched meanders. Here we are back at the San Juan River at the goosenecks, and you can see you have these meanders where you had a nice, quiet, meandering stream. The land was uplifted, and the stream preserved those meanders as it cut down into the rock. Davis, remember, he was the one who had the land being gradually lowered, came up with an idea of the Davis cycle. We no longer believe this too much, but it's an easy way to understand the landscape. You start off with a fairly flat surface. The mountains get uplifted, and that's this youth thing. So you have a big uplift on the land. Then that land, the rivers start cutting and lengthening and valley widening, and you develop a landscape with a broad valley floor and eroded hills around it. That's all those processes we talked about in the last lecture. Then eventually the landscape is all lowered, and you get to this old age here where the stream is been where the river has been, everything's been flattened down to its base level, and then you rejuvenate and it starts over again. And to be a true Davis cycle, this rejuvenation would look something like the youth again. And finally, the last major concept on this is that river erosion is balanced by uplift in many places. So as a river cuts down, you can remember the concept. It was a couple of weeks ago, but we talked about the concept of isostasy, which is that the land basically is floating in the crust of the earth is floating in the mantle. And so if you erode the Earth's surface, there's less weight pushing rock down into the mantle, and it rises back. And that means that over time, mountains gradually erode and get lower, but it takes much, much longer for that to happen than you would think. And that is it for this week and for chapter 16.